fun audience that I've had in a very long time. Normally we're talking to really boring people, but
Are you seeing any of the boring people?
no, I'm really looking forward to this because it's, I mean, you guys look like a fantastic, fun and interesting audience. So very happy to be here. I've also made my presentation fun and interesting, just to keep to the theme. I'm tired of making boring presentations. I just thought I'd have a bit of fun today. You can just pull it up. This is, it's don't go by the title or anything. This is really just a lot of thoughts and experiences from doing landscape scale conservation for over 20 years. Mostly part of my organization WWF, but the stories that I tell and the questions that I pose are common to all of us who are working in this field. It's a collection and amalgamation of experiences from around this room, I'm pretty sure. You'll all relate to much of it. And that's where I started my research. I just thought, wow, this is what a landscape is, and this is what I want to work on. Because it brought together the elements of people, culture, nature, all of it together, which was my idealistic young person. How do I... But this is also a landscape. Right? The reality is that not only that is a landscape, but this is very much part of one of our landscapes as well. So landscape conservation is not as simple as it seemed in those early days. It's a far more complex beast. And so this is or was our Central India landscape. It's changed now and they keep evolving as well. And as somebody mentioned, as Jagdish mentioned, when we first started, we really focused on threats, right? It was all about all of these things. All of this was going on in the landscape, and we were trying to figure out how do we deal with all these threats. There's all these multiple threats going on in the landscape, we need to work with all of this. And we were very threat-based and threat-focused in our approach. Of course, as time goes on, we realize that these are all interconnected, and they don't work in isolation. There's systems and processes that connect all of these. You can see I had fun with this slide. Let's just play around. But this is sort of the emerging reality that it's not quite as simple, and all of these are not necessarily threats. Right? Many of these are opportunities. It depends on how it's being implemented on the ground. So the picture becomes much more complex and much more interesting. I don't know where Prachi is. She's the queen of corridors as far as we're concerned. And so this is not my domain. I will just mention the fact that a lot of the work that we do on a landscape scale is about maintaining connectivity, it's about working on corridors, and it's about looking at what's going on inside corridors. What's actually happening in these corridors that we're talking about and that we're trying to conserve. So here's an example. Okay, this is a beautiful corridor, very close to where I live. It's Rajaji, for those of you who know it. And we all know by now that animals and large megafauna can easily cross this kind of landscape. This landscape is not a big problem, and this is what we're trying to maintain. We're trying to maintain this kind of connectivity, but within a very few years, this very same corridor, this is what it looks like, right? And this is what's happening in a lot of our corridors. Jagdish talked about urbanization. If you ask me, this is the single biggest threat. Because it is happening insidiously, it's happening very fast. Before you know it, this picture looks very different today. Even this, many animals have learned to cross, right? That they can still cross this kind of landscape, but it's getting worse by the day. And we as conservationists, I don't think are giving enough attention to the issue of urbanization, because India is the most rapidly urbanizing country in the world today, and we are losing a lot of our ecosystems to this. So we recognize this, and we said, okay, urbanization is a big issue, let's start working on it. But how do you start tackling urbanization? As a conservation organization, where do you even start? What's your entry point? Who do you talk to? Who's making these plans? Are there even plans? Who's deciding what's going on in these places? You have to, sort of figure out all of that. So we started with a simple mapping exercise to just look at what's happening in the landscape. What's happening to cities in the landscape? How are they growing, and what direction are they growing in? Because that's very important. Are they growing into the forest? Are they growing elsewhere? Is there a plan? Is there a strategy? What's going on? So we started building our understanding on what's going on. Then we looked at something that really scared the hell out of us. So Dehradun is in an eco-sensitive zone. It's actually one of the few designated eco-sensitive areas in the country. And so one would think that there is a plan. And there is. So there is a plan. So there is an existing master plan. The red areas are built up and the green areas are various different forms of land use. The proposed plan 2040 for Dehradun looks like this. More built up area, some of the areas very converted. So there is a plan of sorts. The reality is this. So there's no point having a plan, right? Because this is what it looks like today. Nowhere even near the 2040 master plan. How do you even start working? And this is just one zone, right? This way there are multiple zones in the city. We mapped each one of those and we found that this is what's going on. So we kind of threw our hands up in the air and said, this is impossible. I mean, where do you even start working on something like this? And so we had these ideas that we would look at all of these different, across the landscape. We'd look at all the towns near the forest areas and we'd start proposing how urbanization should happen. You're not going to stop it. Right? The question is, how do you influence what's going on? Surprisingly, we found that there was a really good receptivity. We just hadn't knocked on the right doors and we hadn't given the right answers to the questions that were probably not being asked. So when we started working on this, we found that not only were they accepting our suggestions in terms of how and what cities and how cities should be planned, but they were actually reaching out to us proactively. So I'll give you an example again of Rishikesh. This is a sensitive town, it's very close to the forest. The way this town grows is going to impact a lot of things, both rivers and forests, because it has a riverine exposure also, of course, the Ganga, and also the forest areas. So we started talking to them. And I'll just give you one example of riverine work that we did. So they were developing all kinds of things along the riverfront without realizing that there's marshes, there's spawning grounds, there's fish breeding grounds, etc., nothing. So when we engaged with them and started discussing this, we were actually able to influence the plan. They stopped construction activities in certain areas. Similarly, they were building a huge train depot because a big railway line is going to go up into the mountains from Rishikesh, and it was bang in the middle of an elephant corridor. And we were able to talk to them and say, don't do it here, this is not the best place, etc. There was a road alignment that was going through another corridor. Again, we talked to them and said, don't do it this way, etc. And all of this has been accepted and put into the master plan, believe it or not. So it didn't take a huge amount of effort from our part. It was just knowing who to talk to, when to talk to, and etc. So now they're coming to us. We just got another letter from them inviting us for the next planning phase to say, come and give your input. Their main feedback to us was, nobody told us. Their main feedback was, why didn't anybody tell us that this depot is in the middle of an elephant corridor? If someone had told us earlier, it would have been much easier. Similarly for some of this other stuff. So the point is, if you talk and you have the dialogue and you negotiate the trade-offs, the main issue was negotiating trade-offs. And saying, well, if not here, then where? You can't just go and say, don't do it. You've got to go and say, don't do it here, but do it here. Don't do it this way, but do it this way. So it was all about negotiating trade-offs with the town planners. And it did work. So to my mind, this is the big new area of work that we need to focus on. And I've already been talking to Jagdish, who's sitting in the right place, to say, give us an urban planner. We need full-time urban planners in conservation organizations who can help do this kind of work. Okay, so this is one lesson, and I think somewhere where we feel that we can make headway if we are in the right time and the right place. Mining. So this was another area that, especially in central India, many years ago, almost a decade more ago, we thought, we've got to tackle mining. For a long time we avoided it. For a long time we said, this is not our purview, mining is too complicated, we're a conservation organization, we'll never be able to deal with these big mining companies, let's just pretend it's not happening. And let's work on everything else except mining. And then of course we said, no, we can't do that, we've got to address mining. So we got a mining engineer on board, who we hired for a retired mining engineer, because we don't know nothing about how to talk to mining companies. Same problem. Who do you talk to in a mining company? Who's going to listen to you? So we got somebody who advised us, and we started thinking about what's the best way to engage with mining companies. Some of you might have seen this. So the idea was to actually inform, one was restoration, but the other was, they open mines in a sequential manner, was to say these are critical areas, don't open these mines now. Open these mines later, or don't open them at all. but we will give you the information on the biodiversity significance of some of these areas. Our hope being that coal mining would be phased out in 30 years, and by that time these mines will never get open. But anyway, so that was the plan. And so we wanted to make recommendations. We wanted these recommendations to be included in the forest working plans. We wanted modern restoration plans to be made. And we wanted this working group or some kind of a conservation working group to provide information on the siting and opening of new mines. That was our intent. What to say? We got up to a certain point, and then we just fizzled out. I don't think there's any other word for it. But you know how these things go, that when you have a receptive forest officer, a great DFO who's listening to you and all of this, you have good partnerships, you have the data, you have the capacity, and you have somebody who can advise you, it all kind of comes together, and there's a fantastic buzz. So at a certain point in time, we were really buzzing on this. We were really moving and excited and thinking, wow, we've cracked the mining problem, we're going to solve it. But then the DFO got transferred, and something else happened, and something else happened, and all of this collapsed, and now it's really hard to pick the pieces up again, because this is a hard piece of work. And we've not been able to pick up the pieces. So we have something to talk about for us as a conservation community as to what are we going to do about mining, collectively together, because this is not something any individual organization can do. So are we going to ignore mining, or are we going to take it heads on, or are we going to at least find some sort of way to engage with this issue of extractives? Because it's not just coal. Yeah, this landscape is riddled with mining of all kinds of minerals. It will only expand. So let's think about this a little bit. So linear. Many people in this room are also working on linear infrastructure. We know what the problem is. We know it's going to get worse. But again, something where some headway, I feel, has been made, despite all my pessimism on this particular one. I'm being pushed to say, no, things are actually improving. Okay, I believe you. I love this picture because this tells you what roads in India used to be like. You could run into anything on a road. And this is, of course, the roads of the future, which are basically barriers to wildlife movement. And we've got to find solutions for this. So, yeah, here we are, right in this very landscape, right? This is what we are shown as a success story over and over again. Here it is, you've got, the world's longest overpass or whatever it is, you've got animals using it. So here's the solution to our road problem. And this is happening now everywhere. So, all over India now, you're seeing roads being built with wildlife passages in different shapes and forms. We need to, of course, assess much more closely whether they all work or not. But this is happening at an significant additional cost. And I frankly don't know any other country in the world that is doing as much of this right now in terms of road building as we are doing in India. We also feel that we've found a way in, unlike the mining one, we've actually found a way in with the road building industry. And we know different entry points where you can actually go in and start talking to road engineers, start talking to planners, and influence the process of road building. So this, we feel, is something that we need to really continue to strengthen, work on. In different cases, we are able to work at different stages. The idea, of course, is to work at the top stage as much as possible so that you influence the planning. If not the planning, see if you can realign a road. If you can't realign, mitigate. If you can't mitigate, restore. So there are all of these possibilities. We have actually made an entry point, particularly into the second and third phases. The first is still slightly tricky, but we get there. We've got large projects funded by bilateral agencies. The government is more accepting of these kinds of initiatives, and we believe that at least on this one, we've made some significant progress compared to what it was 10 years ago. I really do feel that it's moved a long way. We don't have to break our heads the way we used to have to explain things. We still need to train the engineers though. There's a long training process with the engineers. Agriculture. So, agriculture is transforming these landscapes also. It's changed a lot. There's a lot of much more commercial, medium-scale agriculture as compared to the small, millet-based agriculture. And we know that this is changing. We need to figure out how does this change benefit both people and the landscape. So cotton is something that we've been working on for a very long time. And that's kind of, again, the chain is established. So you have large areas where organic cotton is being promoted. There are linkages with buyers who pay a premium for organic cotton. These buyers are then selling those at a high price to somebody else. And these profits are coming straight back to the cooperatives or the farming cooperatives or the farmer producer companies that have been set up. So essentially, if you look at it, it's a win-win, where you have better practices in terms of organic cotton, you have higher returns for the farmers, you have direct incentives to the farmer producer companies to continue to grow cotton sustainably, as opposed to unsustainable cotton. Cotton, is one of the most unsustainably produced crops, with the highest amount of pesticide and chemicals being used. So if you can improve cotton production and get higher benefits to farmers and benefit the environment, then you sort of have a win-win situation here. And this is really working at scale. So it's not 500 farmers or 600 or 10, it's over 10,000 farmers. So the entire corridor, the entire Kanha page corridor, the cotton farming can be transformed. But cotton is not the only crop, right? So what do you do with all the other crops that are growing in the landscape? Possibly moving towards unsustainability. One of the most unsustainably produced crops, with the highest amount of pesticide and chemicals being used. So if you can improve cotton production and get higher benefits to farmers and benefit the environment, then you sort of have a win-win situation here. And this is really working at scale. So it's not 500 farmers or 600 or 10, it's over 10,000 farmers. So the entire corridor, the entire Kanha page corridor, the cotton farming can be transformed. But cotton is not the only crop, right? So what do you do with all the other crops that are growing in the landscape? Possibly moving towards unsustainability. Again, the vision, and I heard many people yesterday talking about this vision, is to maintain the mosaic. Is how do we, in this landscape, maintain the mosaic, because you have subsistence, small scale, medium scale agriculture, and forests interspersed, and this actually works at a landscape scale for conservation, for wildlife, provided the agriculture is sustainable and provided there's no large scale transformation. So if you want to preserve this or conserve this, how do we make this production system more viable for farmers? How do we make a small scale or medium scale agriculture system viable for farmers so that they don't convert the land or the land doesn't get converted to something else? That's the trick. But cotton works because it's an export-oriented crop. There's a demand for sustainable cotton. Where is the demand for sustainable millets, rice, etc., etc.? Yeah, we've seen it. We've seen, yesterday I saw fantastic examples, but it's not at scale. We're going to have to go to scale if we want to do this. And is it possible to actually go to scale on sustainable production? There was an idea that we called wild stuff. And this basically was about transforming unsustainable production landscapes into sustainable production landscapes. And for this, we wanted to actually create sustainable production mechanisms and ways of producing crops sustainably, which exist. It doesn't matter which crop you're growing, you can grow it more sustainably, you can get it certified. But then you need to create the markets. And where are the markets going to come from? And the fact is that all of us, so many different NGOs, so many different organizations are doing the same stuff around in this landscape. We're all working on millets, we're all working on this, but we're not aggregating. We're not going to scale because each one of us is doing our own great little enterprise, honey here and this there and that there, which is all working at that scale. But if you want this kind of transformation, then that's not going to work. We've got to somehow get together and we've got to create a platform where we can all get together and somehow create a market and a pull for these kinds of products. So we want to actually mainstream sustainability, if that makes sense. And so we had this idea that we would actually go and talk to these big guys and create a platform where everybody who's working on sustainable production can come together and collectively market your stuff. And so you're actually connecting a buyer with a producer. And somebody can go onto this platform and say, I want Godu produced from Chhattisgarh because I'm very fond of that, etc. They should be able to go and buy it. And somebody at the back end is doing the certification. At the back end, there's someone, and again, there are so many certification standards. We'd have to figure out what certification and who does it, so you don't lose the crop. But this was the big idea we had. We've been working on it, fits and starts. Again, something that I want to throw out to this group. Let's see, if we can come together, all of us who are working on the same thing, and and create this wild stuff thing. That we've taken up to a certain point, we've done the feasibility, we've talked to Paytm, we've talked to Flipkart, and all of these guys, and we've gotten to a certain level, but again, there are ideas and there's implementation and there's a gap between the two, and we are somewhere lost in the gap, and would love to bridge that with the help of many other partners in this room, if it makes sense. Energy. Okay, so I'm not one of those people who gets freaked out by photos like this. Lots of conservation people and foresters, etc. just hate the thought of, whether it is subsistence or whether it is commercial. There's wood coming out from forest all the time, everywhere. Wood grows back. It's okay if it's used sustainably, if it's used within limits. There's nothing wrong with it. There may be other issues with health and stuff, but otherwise, it's not necessarily a horrible thing. Because people are using firewood. But we've also seen that it is actually becoming worse and worse. In many places, getting more and more commercialized. Again, one of my biggest, complaints from a forest or whatever, is that we always tackle the fuel wood issue with the small guys. With the villagers, with the poor woman who's cooking in her house using some bits of sticks. But right outside, there'll be commercial dhabas. There'll be dhabas catering to tourists, to pilgrims, who are using any amount of wood for cooking on a commercial scale. We're not able to tackle that. We've tried. Let me not say that we've not tried. We've tried, but it's much harder. So then you go for the small guy. And what do? You give the small guy some small solutions. Right? So fuel efficient fuelers, I don't know how many of us in this room have been through that phase. We're still there. All of that stuff that goes on. And I still remember, this is more than a decade ago, more than 15 years ago, I remember talking to some women from the village where we were trying to do biogas. And we went to do biogas stuff. And she just looked at me and she said, why? Why do I have to do biogas when you guys get cylinders? Why can't I get a cylinder? Why do I have to mess around with all this and go and what fit, do this, do that? So why can't I just get a cylinder? I also want the same facilities that you do. And that was a big, it was a message very clearly coming that we also want to leapfrog. We also want to leapfrog technologies from being, from using firewood in an inefficient stove to actually having access to LPG. And that's what's been going on now. A lot of the rural areas, we're now looking straight at LPG and not going through the phases of fuel efficient, biogas, etc., because this is what the people want. And we've got to look at the aspirations of people as well. So that's certainly changed. But increasingly, we're looking at renewable energy as well. And renewable energy at scale. So it's not about household level, but it's about setting up microgrids which the villagers are managing themselves. So in the Sundarbans, for example, we have the largest solar energy program, even bigger than the government's, where we are actually providing the islands with their own microgrids, which they are managing on their own. And they are managing it so well that when there was a cyclone, the last two cyclones in the Sundarbans, the grid took much longer to come back than these guys fixing their solar systems. So they were much better off than the ones who were on the grid. But also looking at productive uses of solar, of renewable, not just for lighting. So moving away from just the lighting solution to saying you can actually use renewable energy for much more. You can use it for productive uses in your daily life, in your everyday life, in terms of whatever you're doing, whether it is chilling or vegetable storage or anything that enhances your economy and your valuation, you can actually use renewable energy for. So that's a milk chiller, actually that's running on renewable energy rather than on diesel. Because otherwise they're having to run their chillers on diesel. So people are moving up the economic ladder. We also need to move the technology up the economic ladder and start seeing how you can provide technological solutions. And a proud-looking lady, I love that smile on her face. She's running a whole scheme in her village where the men have to come to her to charge their mobile phones and pay her. So she's sitting there with a grin on her face because she's running this entire thing and all the men are dependent on her for charging their mobile phones. Livelihoods. We've done it all. Yeah? Everybody sitting in this room. You've done everything. I haven't shown honey because honey is like everywhere. But we've done all kinds of different livelihoods to enhance incomes, to lead people to the forest, all of that. The biggest transformation we found over the years in this is mobile phones. Okay, the single biggest leap in terms of how people are accessing information, how they're learning, how they're selling, how they're buying, how they're negotiating, is all happening through mobile phone technology. So we've got to also, and COVID actually reinforced this. During COVID, we were doing everything through mobile phones. You know, we couldn't get into the villages. So everything was happening, and again, all of you must have seen this transformation, and this transformation has now stayed. This has stayed, and people have become completely dependent, reliant, and very conversant, far more than me. I mean, in some village and rural communities, they use the phones for so many more things than I use the phone for. That we've got to see how do we harness this transformation and this leap towards enhancing both livelihoods and incomes. And finally, this is again a question that we are grappling with, is while we're doing a lot of livelihoods that are forest-based, many communities are looking for non-forest-based livelihoods. They're actually looking to get away. They're actually looking to move into another economic scale, whether it is renewable technology, whether it is call centers, whether it is the milk chiller thing that I was talking about, moving up that value chain. So this is a question that we're asking ourselves as well, and I'm sure many of you are, is where do we go with skills development in many rural areas? Do we continue to bank on skills that are largely forest-based, which is also good, but in addition to that, should we be thinking of skills transformation at another level? We're talking to some of the big companies, to the Tatas and others, to say, how do you set up entrepreneurial centers, skill development centers, which are taking rural people's aspirations to where they want to be, rather than maybe in some cases even holding them back. So a question, I don't have the answer for this, but this is something that we need to start thinking, exploring as people get more connected. And then I just want to add, I want to bring in the FRA thing. Oh, sorry, there should be another slide here. How do I go back? How do I go back? I can't find the slide here. Okay, the FRA question. Especially in Central India. Again, many organizations working on it, including ours and many others working much more closely on FRA. Where do we go here? Do we join forces on this? Do we scale it up? Do we actually say, okay, all of us are doing FRA in a few villages here, we've got some titles there, we've done this here. Does it require organizations like ours to come together to say, if this is going to be the future in terms of empowerment, in terms of community empowerment, over forest resources and conservation, if this is the future, should we be getting together to do this at scale? And if so, how? We're talking to organizations, we're talking to Sharad and Atri, we're talking to people at ISD, we're talking to various people who are looking at it on scale to say, is that the answer? Especially if you're talking community forest rights. Is that the future, and should we be doing something more than what we're doing now? We also know, especially in the eastern part of this landscape, if you move in Telangana and other places, there's a lot of misuse. There's a lot of political misuse of individual rights, and it's a mess in terms of the forest department really fighting back and not wanting to do this. So on the one hand, there's a big push towards relocation from the authorities. On the other hand, from civil society, there's a big push towards FRA and CFR, and the twain are kind of, clashing. So we've got to figure this out. And first of all, we as a community need to figure out, do we have a common stand on this? And do we want to really push this at scale? And if so, how do we do it? This is another question I'm going to throw out and leave, because we will continue otherwise to do this small scale stuff, and in the meantime, individual rights are being given out in the lakhs, and we don't know what's going on in the larger landscape. So let's think about this one as well, because in particular for Central India, this is a critical issue. And I'm just going to end with a couple more slides. So this is conflict, right? We know what's going on, human-wildlife conflict, livestock conflict, carnivore conflict, something we've been working on for a very long time. My entire team is standing back there, who spent their entire careers to some extent in working on this issue. And we've moved from the compensation, individual cattle compensation, which is still going on, and Kobe Foundation, in fact, is a key partner of ours in this as well. Everybody swears till they're blue in the face, and I have no choice but to believe them, that this works. And that by doing this, you are actually reducing conflict, and retaliatory killings have almost gone down. and this is a really good way of managing conflict to some extent, and I will believe it, because it's, yeah. We've also moved from this to insurance. So on the right hand side you see we've been trying to work with group insurance schemes with communities to actually look at cattle insurance and incentivize differential behavior. So if the cattle are insured, they're going to look after them better, and therefore they're going to be less likely to come into conflict with wildlife, and they will get better returns as well from the insurance. So trying to move towards that. Hard slog, happening in some cases, not happening in other cases, again needs more collective buy-in for this to work. But what we haven't cracked, and I'm sorry I couldn't find better pictures, what we haven't cracked is the herbivore conflict problem. Right? And I see lots of other faces, because it's easier, more sexy, more glamorous to work on the carnivore problem. In the meantime, what people are really fed up with, and what is really lowering tolerance levels, is herbivore conflict and monkeys. Right? And we still kind of saying, yeah, it's important, we acknowledge it's important, but we haven't found a solution. So I think this is something where we collectively need to put our heads together, solve this problem for communities. Every day in the papers you're reading this, that people are just, fed up. This is my favorite picture. So this is basically to show the evolution of our thinking and our thought process from conflict to coexistence, right? We're going to, and Jagdish talked about shared spaces. This is all about shared spaces and coexistence. It's how are we going to live with wildlife in the future? What sort of attitudes, what sort of mechanisms, what sort of compensation, what sort of management is going to be needed to allow us to live on this crowded place with the lots of wildlife that we want. Okay, so we've created a coexistence initiative. We're looking at how to really understand coexistence. We're looking at how to understand tolerance, and then trying to develop mechanisms. We use this a lot in our global work, which basically shows that we really don't understand a lot about either animal behavior or human behavior in terms of what are these tolerance limits, and why is it that the most crowded, the poorest countries on the planet have more tigers than richer or better off countries. What is it that is actually driving this? We don't fully understand the drivers. So one of the things we need to do collectively also is to look at a deeper look into what these drivers are. And then finally, this is my last final promise, is the whole economic argument thing. Okay, for a very long time we were kind of thinking that one of the reasons why policymakers and decision makers don't take conservation seriously is because we've not made the economic argument. We've not actually shown in terms of real rupee terms of what it means to either lose biodiversity or to protect biodiversity. So we did a lot of work on this. We did a bunch of studies which looked at wetlands, we looked at this, we looked at forests, we looked at landscapes. We know that Madhu Verma did that whole study on tiger landscapes. It doesn't seem to make a difference. It's still not really, this is not how decisions are being made. They're not being made based on the number of economic arguments. We've shown this to policymakers from chief minister down. They all say, yeah, of course it's very important, but decisions are made on politics, on votes, on this and that and the other. So what do we do about this? And again, this is a collective question I'm going to throw to us as a group. Do we continue to make these economic arguments? Are we missing a trick? Are we missing the step between doing the study and doing the advocacy of the study? Do we need to do more collective advocacy? Because again, one organization, one person, one chief minister, maybe that's not the way it works. Maybe we need to look at more, and like Jagdish's example of that paper with 18 authors and 10 different organizations. Is that the future? Do we do more of this kind of work and then develop an advocacy strategy together and figure out how are we going to open the doors? Who do we talk to? One of the things that we're not good at is talking to politicians. We're good at talking to bureaucrats. We've become much better at talking to bureaucrats than we were before. We still are not very good at talking to politicians. And that's where we need to go. If you're going to make the difference, we've got to talk to some key politicians in the language that they understand, with our collective wisdom, and try to make the difference. Because otherwise, I think again, a lot of fantastic work going on, a lot of us, bending our backs, breaking our backs, doing this great work. But when you look at the gains, they're there. They're certainly there. They're incremental. But I still feel we could do a lot more if we did stuff maybe smarter, more cohesively, more collectively. So I just end with that. Thank you.